A class is the core of any modern object-oriented programming language, especially in C#, and objects are the basic runtime entities of an object-oriented system. They represent a person, a place, or any item that a program must handle. In this lecture, let's go ahead and create a class file, and then once we create our class, we're going to initiate an object associated with that class. Remember, an object is an instance of a class, and then in future lectures, we will actually create properties, variables, and methods on our class files. So typically what we're going to do in an ASP.NET Core application, you could create a separate file to associate your class files, but typically what you'll do, you'll come to your model folder here, you'll right-click, you click Add, New Item, or you can click Class. Let's go ahead and click Class. And then let's go over here and let's just name this First Class. This is going to be our first class file. It's going to be used for purposes of demonstrating how to build a class. So we're going to click Add. And right here, you can see that this is our first class file. It's already inheriting a bunch of different libraries associated with the system, system.collections, generic, link, threading tasks. We'll delve into namespaces and variables in the next lecture, but you can see that it's the namespace associated with the course project.models, and this is our class right here. So we have our public class, first class, and then what we typically do on a class file is we initiate a constructor. So what we can do, we can come over here, we can say public, and we can say first class. And once we do this, we can construct any variables or items we want to pass into our class when it is called. If you do not create a constructor in your class file, by default at runtime, a constructor will be generated for you. But in this case, you typically want to create your own constructor because if you want to pass parameters, variables, global variables to associate inside of your class, you can pass it into your constructor and then reuse that in all the methods to associate from your constructor. So as you can see, we have our class file created. Remember that a class is a blueprint of object that contain variables for storing data and functions to perform operations on data. A class will not occupy any memory space, hence it's only a logical representation of data or functions. So typically what we have our class file right there. What we'll do, especially in ASP.NET Core and MVC, we're going to create a separate controller class. So let's go over here, let's click Add, New Item. And we're going to go to MVC controller. And what we're going to name this C# controller. So right now we have a C# controller class created right here. And it has a default index view. So then what we would typically associate in our view is a folder named C#. So let's add a new folder. And let's name that C#. And then inside of C#, we're going to delve into this in the future when we start covering MVC, but let's go ahead and let's create a new item and let's just create a view. And that view is going to be index. So we're going to have index.cshtml. The reason why I want to go ahead and do this is that any data that we want to pass between our models to our controller, we can display that once we implement the different properties on our class. So as you can see right there, we have associated our first class right here. And then we've also created a C# controller to associate with that. So what we can do here is we can create an instance of our class. Now we can do it through dependency injection through our startup.cs, but I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way where I could call right here. So let's go over here and let's call first class a object equals new first class. And as you can see, it's not showing up. So what we got to do is we got to pull in the namespace to associate with this. So once we do that, we've got to incorporate the namespace associated with the assembly, which is in course project.models. Once we associate that, you can see right there that it pulls in. Now we can reference an object of our first class. So this is how you initiate an object. Remember, objects are the basic runtime entities of an object-oriented system. They represent a person, place, or item that a program must handle. Remember, an object is an instance of a class. It is a software bundle of related methods and variables. So as you can see, we created our first class right here. Inside of that, we haven't implemented anything into our constructor. We created our C# controller class right here that's inheriting from the controller class. and then we're implementing an object to associate with our first class. And then what we'll typically do is we'll pass that into our index and pass variables to associate with these class items, and then pull that into our views. And then inside of our view, we created an index.cs HTML page. And then what we'll do is we'll initiate different objects to associate with our class, pull that into our controller index, and then pass it to the view so you can see all of the items to associate. We're going to go further in depth with MVC in future lectures, but in this case, I just want to show you how you would implement a class file, initiate an object. In the next lecture, we're going to create some variables and go into depth into namespaces. I want to thank you for joining me in this lecture.